Today on Faith Over Fear, Leon is joined by A.R. Bernard to discuss his experience fighting COVID-19. But first, let's worship together.
I cast my mind to Calvary, where Jesus bled and died for me. I see his wounds, his hands, his feet, my Savior on that cursed tree. His body bound and drenched in tears, they laid him down in Joseph's tomb. The entrance sealed by heavy stone, Messiah still and all alone. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise, O Lord our God. Then on the third, at break of dawn, the Son of Heaven rose again. Oh, trample death, where is your sting? The angels roar for Christ our King.
Well, it's great to be here with A.R. Bernard, and we're going to have a conversation. A.R., it's good to have you with me.
It is always good to be with you, Leon. We get a chance to really talk about things that are not normally spoken of. So I hope that's where we're going today.
I agree. We had a chance, is it a year or two ago, and we did an interview in one of the cities in America. I can't remember which one it was, one of the studios. And I thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. I love people who are authentic and not afraid to get edgy, because it makes good TV.
Well, those are the criticisms that surround me here in America and around the world. So, people get nervous because they don't know where I'm going to go.
Yeah.
It's okay.
You caught COVID-19, and I want to hear that story because I heard a bit of it, and whoa, it was fascinating. And tell me what happened with this COVID-19. You started getting sick, and just take it from there.
Well, the months of January and February and the first couple weeks in March were busy. I was traveling locally and also traveling to our campus in Orlando, Florida. And that was the extent of my travel. I wasn't going overseas or anything like that. Traveled out to LA in January. And I interacted with a lot of people. Some of our staff, volunteer staff members. So, to try to trace it back, it would be an exercise in futility. So I didn't even bother trying to figure that out. So in the third week in March, I started having symptoms of fever, a dry cough, headache, body aches, the chills, and it started to get worse. And I noticed myself fatigued. But usually, because I have lived in a controlled way with asthma for 30 years, so more than 30 years. So around this season, allergies start kicking up. So you wonder, okay, is it that? Is it the flu? What is it? But by March 28th, that Saturday morning, I had a serious Friday night before that, where, man, my body was shaking. I was having tremors. So when I woke up in the morning, I couldn't breathe. And I knew that at that point, time to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
So I called my son, Jamal. You know, he is, of course, my right-hand guy here in ministry, and really stepped in beautifully. And I said, I got to go to the hospital. So he says, no problem, Dad. Came over, picked me up, took me to the hospital. When we get there, and I chose this hospital because they had my records, et cetera, and great place. And when we got there, it was a ghost town. In front of the emergency room, you had these tents constructed as a maze that you had to go through in order to get into the emergency room. So this is about 7:30 Saturday morning. So when we get there, he's getting ready to come in with me, and the security person said, no, you can't come in. Nobody can come in with him. So he had to leave. Usually in an emergency room, you know, the person who brought you has to fill out paperwork and stuff. No. So I was taken into the ER. It was somewhat quiet when I got there, which I was glad. And they put me into it's not a room, it's like a cubicle, because you have these sections that are divided by curtains. And so I got there, they checked my blood oxygen levels right away, and they were low. They were down to like 85, which is not good. So they immediately put me on oxygen. They began running tests, blood tests, EKG. They started taking x-rays and just working through what the possibilities may be. They gave me a COVID test. And the COVID test that they gave me took 48 hours to get the results. But being there after 2 hours, they determined that I had the symptoms at least, so they should keep me. I was there in the ER for 8 hours. And the proximity was like 3 feet between you and the person that's next to you. And the only thing that's dividing you, you know, separating that space is a curtain. So you're hearing people who are going through the hacking cough, the symptoms, the pain, all of that. And out in front of me, the curtain was open so I could see movement of hospital personnel, healthcare workers. And I could also see, Leon, people being rolled in on a bed, a rolling bed, sitting up and being taken into various rooms. And some of those people, within a half an hour or an hour later, they were being rolled out, laying down with the sheet covering their faces. So, you know, I'm surrounded by death. I'm looking at this, you know, I'm thinking about the fact that my age bracket, the fact that I have underlying respiratory issues. So when someone like me contracts something like this, now you're talking a 50% proposition as to whether you're going to make it or not. So, you know, this is going through my mind, surrounded by death, and I'm processing, you know, my role in all of this. So, you know, I'm talking to God, I'm praying, I'm thinking, interacting with the personnel, asking questions. And I stayed there for 8 hours, man, until they were able to secure a room. Once they secured a room, they took me up, and it's not like, you know, a room with a view and nice settings, because once you get in the room, they bring the curtains around you. So you still feel isolated, and the doors kept closed, because usually in a hospital, you know, the door to your room is kept open unless it's something, you know, serious or you want quiet. And, you know, you get to interact with the staff that's passing by or peeking in on you. Everything was closed. And all of the healthcare workers are covered up from head to toe. Not only face masks and gowns, but shields that were down like if they were, what do you call, welders, right? They had shields in front of them. And I get it. I understand. You know, they're dealing with all of these people and they want to protect themselves. So they came in, they started taking more tests, more blood, but I noticed that I began to lose my sense of taste. and my sense of smell. I began to feel anxious. Anxiety began to stir up. I began to feel isolation. And these feelings are messing with my head because I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's going on here?
Wow.
Is this the COVID related? What is it? Within 24 hours of going in, now I'm experiencing an overwhelming feeling of separation, isolation, separation anxiety. Because there are people there, but they're coming and going, doing what they need to do, and getting out of that room as fast as they can. So you're not alone, but you're lonely. You're disconnected. There's nothing that I could say in terms of calling my family to report because I don't know what's happening. I don't know where I am in the process. Then all of a sudden, it began to get dark. I began to experience darkness. I was afraid to go to sleep because when I would go to sleep, I would have these nightmares. And in these nightmares, I'm in this, in these dark spaces. Then it got to the point where I had difficulty separating reality from non-reality or other reality. It just got ugly. And I will tell you, it became so intense that my only way of finding peace was abandoning myself to God's providence. And once I did that, it was like, okay, kind of what will be, que sera, sera, right? And I found peace there. And then all of a sudden, I began to think scripturally about light and darkness and the conflict of light and darkness and what Jesus represented as the light shining into the darkness and how the darkness reacted, John chapter 1, because it couldn't comprehend the light. It couldn't extinguish the light. It couldn't ally the light or appropriate it. So this light that entered the darkness baffled the darkness. And the darkness, stood up against this light. And I really saw that conflict on a cosmic level. And here I am experiencing it as a fraction of what Jesus went through. And I began to explore in my mind the text. That's why I love the passage where David said, thy word have I hid in my heart, a little King James language here. Thy word have I hid in my heart that I might not sin against you. So he was saying the word engrafted in the soul, in the psyche of the individual, influences and informs and directs the decisions that it makes. Because the brain, again, simply collects data, but the mind is what takes that data and tries to make sense of it. And it does that through a process that depends on how that mind has been informed, what the worldview is, what the framework is, the value system, all of that. So, man, I began to dig deep in my relationship with God and my Christianity and began to explore and unpack scripture. That carried me through.
Yeah.
I reflected on the Garden of Gethsemane, what Jesus went through in the garden, the whole theme of the resurrection. And interestingly enough, this whole pandemic reached critical mass during the holiest week of the Christian faith and the Passover to Judaism. And what were the metaphors? Darkness and light. To the Jews celebrating the first exodus from Egypt, darkness covered the land. To us as Christians, Jesus is on the cross. Darkness covers the land. And then the resurrection, where light triumphs over darkness, life triumphs over death, love triumphs over fear, hatred, hostility, and anger, and woundedness and brokenness of humanity. And these are the things that are running through my mind.
How many days have gone by now?
I was there for 5 days, but within 36 hours, because what they did, they made a decision to treat me with something that the president was talking about, and that is hydroxychloroquine, which is a drug that is used to treat malaria. And they decided to treat me with that along with azithromycin, which is an antibacteria drug. It's an antibiotic. And they wisely gave me injections in my stomach on both sides of anticoagulants to keep my blood from clotting.
I thought that was controversial.
Yeah, it's controversial, but I'm glad they didn't argue about it. I'm happy that they made the decision to go ahead and use that as treatment. And they gave me the anticoagulants because people were being brought into the emergency room and dying within hours because this virus was actually creating blood clots that would move through the respiratory and hit the heart. So this thing not only attacked the lungs and the bronchial passage and caused the lungs to fill up with liquid, and that's why people couldn't exchange air and oxygen and carbon dioxide, and they needed to then move to a ventilator. Thank God I didn't need a ventilator, didn't need to go into ICU or CCU. But those who had gotten to that point is because the virus got that far. So within 36 hours, all of a sudden, I'm seeing a change.
Wow.
The darkness lifts, the anxiety lifts, the fever breaks, the aches and pains go. I still can't taste, I can't smell. Things are becoming stabilized. And by that 5th day, I was ready to go home. And I will tell you, talk about empathy. I began to feel for the people and those who were dying from it. And, you know, and the numbers, the statistics. And I'm saying, gosh, so it's not like I left the hospital surrounded by death and got home free from it. No, I get home. Now all of society is now wrestling with death. And it's something that I would not wish on anyone. Strange thing is that the medications that I used to take to control asthma have been reduced by 60%. I don't need them anymore. I do know that the virus has somehow altered my lungs, changed my body in some way that I'm probably going to have to discover. You know,
for the worse or for the better?
For the better.
Really?
I mean, it reduced the amount of medication that I had to take for asthma by 60%.
That's crazy.
And I know. How do we explain that? I don't know.
Now, when we talk about this, like, you are very involved, and I think it's one of the things I really respect about you, AR, is your involvement in culture, your involvement in government, right there in New York, as well as even nationally. You're very connected, and countries around the world. And so you and I started a quick conversation before we got on the air, and I'd like to go back to that now because you've checked some things out. You have access to people I don't even have access to. What's going on? What are some of the facts that bother you, or some of the things that are bothering you about the COVID-19 crisis?
Well, you know, this virus is insidious. It's unpredictable. A 104-year-old guy had the virus, had severe symptoms, and got up and walked out the hospital. How do we explain that? A 21-year-old young lady got the virus, and within 2 days, her mother thought she had a bad cold. Within 2 days, she's dead. How do we explain that? And she had no underlying conditions, and yet it was able to take her. The hysteria, the paranoia, the rapid death rate. We've had numbers where overnight 800 people die. 768 people die. Thank God that's going down now because of social distancing. But when you have all of that going on, man, people can become paranoid.
You know, when people are afraid, like I remember being a paramedic for 7 years, and we worked out of a hospital, and we had different people that would bring their kids in because they were so fearful. And when they were fearful, that she wouldn't let this daughter play outside, wouldn't let her touch other kids, wouldn't let her climb trees, was always in the hospital. She made every decision wrong in the raising of that child. And I knew another mom that kept coming in with her son who was tormented by fear. And when leaders are fearful, and there's other reasons too, they make bad decisions. And so we need to pray as a church that, you know, that wisdom will rise up, that the best leaders will rise to the top, that if there is evil people somewhere taking advantage of it, God, remove them and give us leaders after your own heart that'll bring us back to a sense of normalcy.
When Jesus said, I was hungry, you fed me. I was naked, you clothed me. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was in prison, you came to see me. He was placing himself outside of the four walls, the typical four walls of the local church. He was placing himself outside of those four walls and where the people are, where the needs are. And too often we don't think about Jesus being there, you know, and that's exactly where he positions himself, and then watches to see how we, who claim to have a relationship with him, respond to him in those needs. He identifies with the disenfranchised, the marginalized, the least of these, the discriminated against. You know, he identifies with them.
I think that the church, I agree so much with that. I think that when the church isn't alive and active and strong and equipping the saints for the work of their ministry. Now, their ministry could be politics as a believer. Their ministry can be healthcare. The church isn't, like you said, just hunkered down being religious or being spiritual, but out of this God consciousness and the gospel that begins to sweep grassroots through a nation, you can raise up incredible leaders, creative, alive, who will lead with such passion and with character. So if the church is alive and functioning, then we get leaders after our own hearts. So I just encourage the church, I hope they are pressing the reset button and going, hey, we need to wake up to the fact we've got a job ahead of us. And that if we present Christ in a spirit contemporary way. We need to be spiritually alive with the presence of God, but then we need to be contemporary. We need to be relevant. We need to be engaging culture in a way that they loved hanging around Jesus. They need to start hanging around us because we're not crazy or weird or boring and dried up, but there's something about us that only Jesus could do.
Well, that's what I call good preaching, Leon.
Well,
that's exactly that the world needs to hear. You know, we disengage God, and yet Christ is the embodiment of God's love, his life, his light, and his hope for humanity. And we want to keep him in a religious box instead of releasing him out there into the world. A true disciple of Jesus is not only experiencing a living, growing, loving relationship with Jesus, but also knows their spiritual gifts, knows their vocation, knows their calling, knows their mission.
Yes.
Not so much to the church, but to the secular world, because that's where we'll make the most difference. That's where we go into all the world and preach the gospel, not only through the message of oral projection, but the lives that we live, the lives that we touch, and the changes that we make in society.
AR, thank you for being with me today. This has been awesome. It's fascinating to hear firsthand, because I actually haven't heard too many people, or maybe they haven't given a chance just to share what goes on when you catch this thing to the degree you did. And I think it's fascinating as well to take a look at our world. And we're supposed to pray for governments, I know your church will be praying, we'll be praying. And you know what? I'd love to touch base again with you when this thing kind of dies down and have another conversation about this. Sound good?
Always my pleasure to be with you, my brother. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. God bless.
Oh, you saved me. Oh, you healed me. Oh, you moved in me, Lord. And oh, my Savior reigns. Death, it holds no weight. My life forever changed by your love, oh Lord. Oh, my Savior reigns. Death, it holds no weight. My life forever changed by your love, oh Lord. Oh, my Savior reigns. Death, it holds no weight. My life forever changed by your love, oh Lord. Oh, my Savior reigns. Death, it holds no weight. My life forever changed by your love, oh Lord. Oh, my Savior reigns. Death, it holds no weight. My life forever changed. Oh, you changed me, you saved me. Goodness, Jesus, all you've done. Oh, you are my Savior. Oh, precious Jesus, you have overcome. You've conquered death and rose again. Hallelujah. Darkness can't.
You are a child of God. Healing, protection, and blessing are a part of your inheritance in Christ. As a Miracle Channel family, let's make a decision every day to choose faith over fear. To get more resources to help you stay in faith, go to miraclechannel.ca/faithoverfear.
You